I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Yes. We are speaking with Iyabo Boyd, founder and executive director of Brown Girls Doc Mafia. Um,
Co-executive director.
co-executive director. I was like, I know I'm missing a word there. Um, and we are going to be talking about social media and tech. But before we talk about all of that stuff, just a little bit about you for those who aren't familiar with your work. Can you tell me how you developed your interest in media as a tool for storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely a kid that watched a lot of movies growing up. I wanted to be an actor. I studied acting for many years, and it wasn't until, my high school where I went to an arts high school and was studying acting there and started to feel really intense, like the acting and auditioning and the eyeballs and being a teenager started feeling really intense. And we had a film department in our school, and they had a screening, and I was like, I can do that. I see what these kids are doing. I can do that. That's interesting. Like that's basically what I want to do, but just not, behind the scenes. It didn't really connect to me that there was a behind the scenes, like how media was created. I didn't quite understand that yet. And so when I saw that access, I was like, oh wow, I can tell my own story and I can help others, share their stories on screen because being a dark-skinned Black woman growing up in Denver, Colorado, I didn't feel like I saw myself on stage or on screen very often. And so instead of being the like representing that physically on stage, I could create worlds. And yeah, that was the beginning of that interest. I went to film school and yeah, I've been doing it ever since.
I love that idea of like you can create worlds, right? It's world building is so critical to everyone's individual lives as well as to all forms of media and connected
Mhm.
technology. I want to just probe a little bit more about your filmmaking practice. You
Yeah.
went to film school. How did you approach your filmmaking practice? How did you decide what to turn the camera on?
Mm. It's interesting. So before film school, I was making films that I felt like kind of repeated what I saw in the media, like I grew up on like There's Something About Mary and kind of white guy comedies. And I was like recreating white guy comedies, that was sort of what I was doing. And seems very strange, but then I don't know. It took me a really long time. It took me a really long time to find my way, and it was just a long time of like, experimentation, soaking up influences and seeing other Black women succeeding in the film industry, or at least telling unique stories. That I don't know. It's weird because on a certain level, I feel self-conscious about wanting to make things about me or about my worldview, but also like, isn't that what that kind of is what social media is, right? It's like you're just sharing your own worldview. And so a lot of the work that I just kind of turned the camera inward, hasn't been, me on screen yet, but it might be in the future. But it has been very much like my internal feelings and thoughts and emotions then projected outwardly. And that seems obvious, but what I mean is like it's the films that I'm making aren't necessarily about completely other different people like it was before. I shifted from being completely other people more into myself.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, there is something powerful about the camera in terms of allowing us to enter another experience, right, and understand ourselves through the differences of
Hmm.
others. But then there is something else much more intimate about trying to tell stories that are closer to ourselves, and vulnerable, I imagine. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, what would you say the guiding vision is behind the stories that you write, direct, produce, which appear to me to be focused on healing and nourishing communities whose stories are less often told?
I think it's because I need the healing, I'm just old enough to still have a little bit of that like hesitation about therapy. I just barely missed the window of this new wave of kids who are all about therapy. I went to therapy briefly in my early 20s and then never went back, and I still need to go back. Don't be like me, go to
Well,
therapy. Um, so I think filmmaking for me is very much like expressing that kind of healing that I want to create for myself, and that I assume and imagine that other people also want to see. Um, yeah, it's kind of always about breaking out. and just, being yourself and reaching out for someone, um, connecting to like transcendent planes in a way. Like, I don't know if you saw my short film Forever Alley.
I haven't actually seen it. No, yeah.
Yeah, it's about a gay black man who's reconnecting with his recently deceased cat through letters beyond the grave. And anyone would think like, okay, what? What does it have to do with you, But there's just something like the script is based on a set of poems that just really got to the heart of feeling really constricted, myself feeling constricted about just who I was and not able to reach out. And that's what the character in this film and the poems was needing to have this I don't know, he's having an emotional relationship with his cat, and his cat is kind of helping him from heaven, from cat heaven, helping him reach out to his himself, to open up as a gay man, to reach out to find love. And I don't know, I think that's just where I was in my life at the time. It just resonated.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would resonate with many people. I mean, pets are such a universal thing, and the way that we, through loss, understand ourselves is like such a universal, but also very culturally specific thing.
Mm.
I want to pivot because I actually realized in our prep questions, I didn't ask you just like, how did Brown Girls Talk Mafia come about? And what are you doing as an organization to support storytellers like you? So if you will mind, I would love to ask you that before we pivot to social media and tech.
Sure. So I was working in documentary for a few years, and was always the token Black girl in the office, and didn't run into other Black women specifically very often in the film industry, in the doc industry. I knew the handful of folks, we knew each other, but I assumed that was kind of just it. I didn't know that there was a much larger group of folks. And long story short, I went to an event that was specifically curating for Black people in the film industry and funders as well. And I was like, I walked into this room and there's, not wall to wall, but there were a lot more Black women in film that I had ever seen before. I'm like, how do we not know each other? Literally, what is your name? Where do you work? How do we not know each other? Let's go have a drink, and 10 or 12 of us went to have a drink right after that event. Basically just fell in love, had this incredible realization about how scattered and isolated we had all been for, years and years. There are, of course, other groups that had existed, but in a way it wasn't, and it really was like Facebook that would allowed BGDM to grow in the way that it did, because I took a picture that night, put it on Facebook, hashtag Black Girls Talk Mafia, which later became Brown Girls Talk Mafia. And that became like a viral moment, that photo. And
Wow.
people were like, oh my God, what is that? I want to join. Can I do, And I was like, oh my gosh. And it just became, we created a group. And then, first week it was 50 people. Next week it was 100 people. And then it just kept growing. It was an underground word of mouth thing. So it's actually really, that social media aspect was so crucial to BGDM's growth and seed.
I love that story so much for the way that you looked around the room and you were like, this is a social network, but one that doesn't have a physical form. It's not being held by anybody. And so, you weren't even necessarily thinking, I need to start a social network or a social group.
Right.
But
I was thinking, I want friends and professional colleagues that can understand what I'm going through, and that I can feel a little bit less isolated. Maybe they could too.
Yeah, and I think, that really goes to what we're supposed to be. What we were sold was the initial purpose of social media, right? Is that there is this kind of loneliness epidemic in the United States. And then, of course, for people based on all of their identities, especially people of color, especially women, especially trans folks, queer folks, etc., we can struggle to find ourselves through systems that don't create spaces for us. I don't think social media was necessarily designed with us in mind, but it was this general idea that people need to be connected. And, maybe we've gone off the rails. We'll talk about that. But I want to start with, that was clearly a very powerful moment where you saw the power of Facebook. Was there a moment before where you realized that social media had this like power to connect? Um, or was it kind of just a thing that you used to connect with the people you knew? And this was the moment where you're like, oh, this actually isn't just about me and my own connections. This can be something larger than myself.
Well, earlier, I don't know if it was earlier, but definitely later. I can say something about
Yeah,
later.
sure.
Um, so one of the kind of juicier moments of Brown Girls Doc Mafia's history is probably 3 years after that initial Facebook creation. I won't name any names, but there was a film directed by two white men who was about a Black character. And that was like very common, and is still very common in the documentary industry. But it was just one of those moments where it was just getting, it was starting to rise to the surface, this tension that filmmakers of color were feeling around it. And one of my members said to the group, "Hey, I want to say something about this, and I need backup. I need support. So if I'm gonna go to this page, I'm gonna go to this director's page and post something about this. Can you guys like observe or have my back or like chime in or just be there for me?" And we're like, "Yeah," and she did it, and it was like, you know, a huge swath of our community put in comments backing her up, and that became it became a huge part of this the Oscar so white moment, and the kind of like the catalyst, or like one of the big pieces of the shifting of the industry or the doc side around representation behind the camera, more funding and support being putting into DI initiatives, et cetera. Like, there's a lot of things that are happening around the same time. We were a little piece of that, but I think again, the power of something like Facebook, where you built where voices and honest opinions can be shared out of nowhere, and that can be the tipping point to roll something into creating change.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that so many times with social media, whether it was like the Arab Spring was started by like a Facebook post, allegedly,
Yeah.
these moments where people are just like, this is my truth. And then other people are like, that's my truth too. And actually, I support you in that can be incredibly powerful. I mean, it really is the power of storytelling, to transform how collectives organize. Um, it seems to me in that moment, because that was like Oscars to White, wasn't that like 2017-ish? It was like right around the first administration of this current administration, and there was just a lot of, or maybe it was right before. Um,
Yeah.
I can't quite remember, but it was around.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but it was around this time where people were questioning about like who has power in media, who has power in storytelling. I mean, I think our current
Mhm.
president comes from reality television, right? And had announced in 2015, and people were like, "Oh, now media is so powerful, it's literally choosing the leaders of the free world."
Mhm.
So who is behind the camera really matters, actually.
Yeah.
Around that time, OTV had released Brown Girls, and a huge part of the like selling point between Sam Bailey and Fatima Asghar's beautiful series was the fact that they had curated this crew and this production primarily of women and queer people and people of color. And that became something that people wanted to, like, it made people want to watch the show, right? But it also, I'm remembering a Facebook post, which is why I'm bringing up, where like they had this coverage that mentioned that, and some person was like, well, imagine what they would have said if it had been 95% white men behind the camera. And people were like, there was like this whole thread about like, you've missed the point. Like completely,
Mhm.
it's like not about that actually. Because of course, people have been historically excluded from these industries for literally generations. And we wonder what could be with if we actually had equity? What could this industry look like? Um, so I'm curious then, as we think about storytelling, um, you know, what are the stories that you think social media struggles to tell? Um, or share really, because I mean, platforms don't tell, but they distribute other people's stories. And that, I mean, stories really writ large, including just like what you all want to talk about Brown Girls Doc Mafia groups, right? Like, I'm thinking about like not everybody sees everything in the group because of the way the news feed is constructed or whatever. I'm curious, like in your experience, has social media been helpful? And when it hasn't been, how has it not been helpful for you personally, for Brown Girls Doc Mafia, for the people that you talk to, for your communities?
Well, I don't know. It's interesting because with 2020 and the pandemic and the slew of, murders of Black people that summer, um, there Hollywood also at the same time was getting that kick in the pants to shift, right? And social media was a big part of that. People were telling stories, of course, sharing, live video of these atrocities or showing experiences in those spaces, which was very challenging. But that motivated, I don't know, millions of people around the world to suddenly care about these issues. And that's wonderful, right? But also like since then, that interest has shifted. And I'm sure that like folks who are experiencing different challenges around the world, we could probably map that kind of like spikes of interest through media. Um, that might not, I don't know, it's like, does it have anything to do with the importance of that issue? Or I don't know, like how do we sustain it,
Mhm.
And can it even really be sustained? I mean, there's so many horrible things happening around the world at all times. Can it be? Do we want it to be, etc.? So just the way that like the attention, I guess, I don't know if you call that the attention economy or something, um, ebbs and flows, and like kind of being on the other side of that, with in terms of the visibility and support of artists of color within that context. Now, 5 years later, having very much waned, I don't know. It's complex emotionally and also logistically for building a community, surviving as a nonprofit, um, helping individuals feel like the greater public care about their journey or their sustainability. Um, it's a really complicated mix of things, but we're not, like I said, we're not alone. There's that flow is like it connects our world in such a valuable way. Um, but there's also something about it that can leave us feeling really yucky.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing up that 2020 moment, which I'm shocked that I've done over a dozen of these conversations and no one has
Mm.
brought up yet because it was a moment where the real stories of harm that were happening in the world were broadcast so quickly, immediately, and broadly. Um,
Mm.
that was, as you said, kind of like re-traumatizing to a lot of folks, but also awakening to other folks. And it led to, I think what has been called one of the largest, if not the largest, protest movements in history, in like world history. Um, at the same time, I think about, what it means to be talking to documentary filmmakers at that time because those were those were documented experiences, right?
Mm.
They were released without the context, without the broad view, the time and the care to understand the full breadth and depth of that story, that I think documentary filmmakers try to do that work, right? So I also, when you talk about sustainability, it does make me think about, you know, the kinds of like the sustainability of documentary filmmakers and their ability to share their stories as widely on social media to get those audiences to make money from telling these stories because it takes a lot of time and work to do these things is actually really critically important to sustaining those movements, right? Because if it's just the flash in the pan horrors that the algorithm distributes because that's what's sexy in the moment,
Cool.
these things go away. So I'm curious in your conversations with filmmakers if that came up at all, if like, people are telling stories about real people, real communities that are trying to heal from harm, broadly conceived, and their kind of like lack of certainty about the sustainability of their own stories in their career in this increasingly tech streaming climate. If that question makes sense. I know that wasn't one we prepped, sorry, but you just made,
No, it's okay.
yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting is that like I think that we're as filmmakers, we're in this crux where traditionally making films costs a lot of money, costs a lot of time, requires a lot of people, and requires a lot of permission and access, and someone else saying, checkbox, yes, here's money, or yes, you're approved for this festival, or you're good enough. Um, and because there isn't really an infrastructure in our government for the arts, it's a lot of, the fundraising part of it is arduous and takes time, a lot of time. And so it's funny because like that has been the history of our, or the kind of mainstay of our industry. But at the same time, when we're talking about people responding so quickly to these real life moments and just posting something right away, um, which I don't think I would call that documentary. I mean, I would call that more reporting. But even when we start thinking about TikTok and YouTube, and how for the most part, folks creating content there can turn it around faster, cheaper. Um, it's putting the doc space at this weird intersection where folks who have done it this way for a long time have judgment about the way that the folks who can move things quicker can do it. I don't know. I think I don't know if it's a class thing. I don't know if it's a powers that be kind of thing. It's there's so many, because there's like the infrastructure, there's like theatrical, there's the way that a camera is held. There's so many differences in traditional making a film, or even making a short film, versus making, like, creating quote unquote content. But you can do a story in either medium, but it depends on what kind of like world you want to live in a certain way. And I was saying recently that like as soon as these TikTok folks decide they really want to be filmmakers, which most of them already have, but as soon as they decide they want to really learn how to use a camera and tell a story, et cetera, like we're screwed because they have so many hours. They've clocked the hours of making this stuff and building an audience already, by the way, and monetizing their audience already, that the 7 years it might take a doc filmmaker to get their magnum opus out, this person's already made 300 films, even if they're only 3 minutes long. And they probably already have like a six-figure salary. It's like we're just at this weird time. It's time currents, and also I don't know if it's class. I don't know if it's class or if it's like a generational thing. If it's like a taste. It's a taste divide. There's a way that people are consuming things. I guess it's an audience divide too, but that's even becoming less. More audiences are watching TikTok than movies in theaters. So it's like on a certain level, like we kind of gotta figure it out. We gotta catch up a bit. I don't have the answers.
I
I'm
mean,
just letting you know. Here are the complicated things that are going on.
I think if you had the answers, you'd be a very rich person right
Yes,
now. I mean, I
we
was
gotta work on that.
I was just at the bank doing some business, and like the bank tellers were telling me, I told them that I teach film and television, and they were like, "Oh, I don't even have the energy to watch a whole film anymore," because I
Yeah.
watch YouTube shorts or TikToks, and I was like,
Yep.
"We're screwed as a society," because I think that
Yeah.
the amount of time and attention it takes to sit down and watch a documentary film is about how much space can you hold for someone else's story, right? And
Hmm.
if it's only 30 seconds to 3 minutes, I just think that that does something to a culture. Um, that I think we're living through right now, right? In some ways, the kind of after effects of that, the intensification of people's mistrust of each other and lack of understanding of each other. So yeah, I love those thoughts because I do think there is potentially an intersection to emerge. I don't think anyone knows what it is yet, but there does feel like there's got to be some middle to this, and I have to think that it is the platform's partly to blame. Like I can imagine you can design an algorithm any kind of way, right? You can design one that privileges longer videos with multiple voices. Like you could do that, especially now with AI. You could definitely do that. That's not what they're doing, right? That's not a priority for them because that is not what they think will make them money. The shorter the videos you watch, the more you'll watch, the more information you'll give them for advertising and all the things. So I'm curious, how are these platforms not serving not even just the stories, but just like your ability to communicate? I think about that exceptional Facebook moment and the ways that it brought together people and you were able to communicate so quickly. Um, I just have the sense as a human on social media, but also as someone who works in coalition, started an organization, that it's increasingly difficult to get through these algorithms, to just see the people that you want to see, like the people who are following Brown Girls Doc Mafia on Instagram and want to know about the fellowship opportunity that you just announced, I think yesterday, right? Does all your audience see that? And if not, what does that do for you? Are you facing these challenges at all?
The challenge of just kind of getting our whole story out.
Yeah. And
I
connecting to
think,
each other.
yeah, I think people are, people are distracted. I mean, what I was going to say before, I think it does connect to this, is that capitalism and time and the powers that be that want to keep us from each other and keep us from having too much free time to think
Mm.
or enjoy the arts or like actually learn about each other. I think those things are all at play because I'm a mom, and even though I want to make films, I want to make feature films, I want people to watch feature films, I also don't have any time to watch feature films at all, or TV shows really. So finding some entertainment for me on the YouTube when I have 35 seconds in between things is actually kind of great. I know that's like maybe an evil thing to say, but I don't know. That's it's kind of great. But when you look at the big picture, why are we why are our schedules and our lives so slammed? Why do we have to work so much when we could enjoy watching a movie? I mean, a movie is it's a painting in its own way. It's about human expression. And I mean, of course, capitalism has tainted that in so many ways. So that's what's kind of interesting to me about social media, TikTok, YouTube, is that it's a hack. I mean, even though the hack has been hacked and the hack has been manipulated its own self at this point, but initially it was a way for people to express themselves outside of these larger systems that I was pointing to before that cost so much money, time, privilege, and permission, etc. It's like people can just do their own thing. So I don't think that that's a bad thing. I don't think that they need to be put against each other. But I do think we should look at the bigger umbrella or the bigger issue of time and money and connection with each other, and how these various powers between the media agencies, the government, who knows what else is under there, that's like trying to keep us from really connecting to each other. So to answer your other question, I think people are divided, they have a lot of personal real life things going on, especially because of, the things that have been created from the government and capitalism, et cetera, that are affecting our very real everyday lives. And I don't know, there's so many different places to receive information that it can be very overwhelming. I kind of like I don't know if you consider this is technology, I guess, but like WhatsApp. Have you noticed on WhatsApp that everyone's moving to WhatsApp now? It's like the new thing. Um, I kind of like it. I mean, I think in terms of the companies, I'm sure that it's useful because you just have someone's phone. I think the phone getting directly, like, I guess your like getting a newsletter, you can read it on your phone, of course, but there's something about like a text message, that's kind of felt like in the last, I don't know, 5 or 7 years more like when you sign up for, get a discount on, a website, they want your phone number now,
Yeah.
you know? Like, okay. But I think it's interesting that communities seem to be flocking to WhatsApp as a place because it's just about where is your attention,
Yeah.
and texting like is the new email. So it makes sense that WhatsApp has become the place where people are gathering because they're on the move.
Yeah.
I have to answer your question. Sorry.
It does. I mean, at this point, email is a job, is like another job. Right? One of
It
those
really is.
things that like we've all just taken second jobs and not acknowledged it. I just love the call to capitalism because it isn't just affecting how platforms work, it is affecting everything, including the legacy industries that many filmmakers are trying to work in, enter. There's all these complex dynamics, but I do think you're right that at the core of it, there is this pressure on time
Hmm.
that is so profound, actually, that we're like in the ocean. We can't see outside of it in America. So I think especially when you look at Europe, when they have government supports for arts organizations, as you mentioned, right? And regulations that don't force people to work more than like 34 hours a week, 35 hours a week, people go to the cinema. Like there are independent art house cinemas that are, doing well in Europe because people have the time. They have childcare, right? They have a month off in the summers. And so when you have more time, you do have more time to connect, to support the arts, to live into a story, as well as to go on social media and swipe, if you only have 35 seconds between whatever you're doing, because I think that all of that social context affects the challenges that we're having connecting through technology here, in the United States. Um, since we are here, and it doesn't seem like we're going to enter a um, pluralist, equitable utopia in the United States anytime soon. Um, do you have any ideas as to how we can develop practices, protocols, maybe new platforms, that motivate people to share stories and knowledge in this divided social media landscape in general, where people are watching Netflix and Peacock and YouTube and TikTok and Facebook and all the things?
I think it's small groups. I mean, our community is like 4,500 plus folks, and that when we were on Facebook, it was cool because somebody would post something and then like 80 people would comment and have support or a response or an idea, and that was amazing. But it also became overwhelming, and you didn't feel like you were really connecting with the real people, with like someone beyond this typing thing. So we started doing more small group gatherings with like 6 or 7 people, meeting once a week, just to actually talk to each other face to face and not just be typing. And I think that's the same with like on the bigger scale, and it is happening. Like folks are utilizing these communities, even folks who are on like I don't I'm not on Twitch or anything like that, but it seems like folks who like gamers, it's not it's not just that you're playing a game by yourself or with a friend in your room, but you are building community with folks through the internet. And I don't know, there's definitely lots of like dangerous things that can happen in that situation, but something about it also feels connecting, you know? Like I know my little cousins, they live in different countries, like their brothers and sisters, they live in different countries, but they talk to each other through playing video games online, and that connects them still.
Boom.
Um, so sorry, going back and forth, but I'm not anti utilizing these technologies to connect. I think that's still very useful, especially because we're so busy. But small groups and really like in person. I think the pandemic compounded the isolation that may have already been there. And I live in New York, so it's very much like an outside kind of city. People like to be social and outside, and it's changed a lot since the pandemic. But I think that human connection is always going to be there, fingers crossed, and people are always going to want to be together in person. So with Brown Girls, we're wanting to do as many more like in-person connections this year as possible. It's going to be our 10th year anniversary this fall, by the way.
Oh,
Thank you. So we're planning on doing a bunch of town halls virtually and in person, and we're going to do like a BGDM tour around the country later this year. So just wanting to like get back into seeing people's faces and hugging and really sharing gratitude and sharing resources. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I'll say that I think there's also the intimacy, like with, and that's hard to create, that's earned. It takes time. But it takes bravery to be someone to share something intimate with a group of people. And it takes like intentionality from at least one or two people from that group to see that bravery, to hold it and speak up and offer support. And that's basically what BGDM is built off of. Like someone saying, I am having a hard time, which is basically what I did. That was the first thing, saying, I'm having a hard time. Come have a hard time with me, or like, let's, get out of it together. And that's basically what we try to do every day for our community and try to help them do with each other.
I love all these things. I love the small group, the intimacy, because I think one of the things where we went left with social media, and I think it relates to capitalism, is the idea that like we can have a space that 100 million, 2 billion people occupy and feel good, right? Like that's not how we have, as humans, have congregated historically. Like you said with the Brown Girls Dog Mafia face group thing, like even seeing 80 people respond to one thing, you imagine all those people in a room and you're like, that's actually a lot of people. I don't know if I would say the same thing or act the same way if that was in space, right? So I love this call to intimacy. And I do want to shout out to anyone watching this on YouTube that we have an interview with Sajal Nasrallah from Kairos, and he was talking about similar things that you were talking about in relation to online spaces that are more intimate, particularly platforms like Twitch, maybe also Reddit and Discord, where people are gathering around something that they love, and they do form real relationships because over time, they're getting to know the other people in the room and building that intimacy, even if they've never seen each other's faces. So it is possible, but like you said, it does take time. And there need to be spaces that can hold those connections sustainably over that period of time. I'm curious. Oh, yes.
I'll just say what's dangerous is that, there's not always privacy in those spaces, and it's not always like a free speech space either, So there's a lot of opportunity for corruption in those spaces. So it's a double-edged sword, but when you can find, that's why the trust building is challenging.
Yes, thank you for that. That's so important. Again, for how we as humans have organized ourselves. Like it's kind of amazing the things that people share on social media. It's like you would never share that in person in a room full of strangers.
It's a confession booth, though. That's like something that I don't know what's the earliest like representation of the confession booth, and if that is like an innate thing that humans need to be able to like whisper something to the dark to someone else. Maybe that's what it is, like whispering in the dark, just like the freedom of being able to talk without judgment. I think that's an innate human thing too.
Yeah, it might be. I'm going to ponder that. That actually it's interesting. It gets me to my next question, which is, have you thought about this thing that I'm calling cultural protocols, which could be ancestral practices or rituals like the confession booth that you think are important for ensuring communities feel secure and connecting with each other through stories, whether that be online or offline? Are there any things that you think about as you organize space?
Consistency. You have to show up. You have to keep showing up. That's how organic relationships builds. You have to keep showing up. And like I said, being brave enough to be honest and share something. Like if everyone's in the room and no one shares anything, then nothing's gonna happen. So you have to be brave enough to share. Um, like I said, holding each other. But hmm, yeah, confession booth. I don't know. I don't know. I'll think about it more.
It's a tough question. Because I think that it's usually the things that we do that we don't think about that are those cultural protocols, right? They're like embedded in
Hmm.
who we are and how we move through the world. But
Yeah. One thing that we're doing is saying is what do you want to bring in or what do you want to release? We're at this week kind of conversation we have is like, what do you want to release from your life right now? And what do you want to call in?
oh,
So I don't know if that's something that can be a contributor to that answer.
I definitely think so. Yeah. I mean, for me, that makes me think about, I don't go to church much anymore, but as a kid, I did. And like, that's why people went to church, right? They went to release the week and call
Mm.
in an intention for the rest of their lives, the next day, the next week, et cetera, right? Call in the Holy Spirit, et cetera. And I think so many religious practices are about that process of release and calling in, even things like astrology or tarot, like any kind of divination practice, I think is about that. So I think it sanctifies any space when you allow people to just set that intention before engaging. So I'm gonna steal that if you don't mind.
Yeah, and it's like group therapy in a way. I mean, I feel like that's what a lot of BGDM is. It's really like group therapy, talking around the campfire.
Ah, the campfire. Yes, yes, indeed. Well, we're almost at time. I really just have one more quick question for you, which is unfortunately very simple, but maybe unfairly difficult. Which is,
Yeah.
what is one specific thing? It could be a cultural practice, a design feature, a platform policy, that you love about social media or tech that is useful to you and you think should continue, and what's one thing you should change or would change?
I don't use it very well. I need to set it up better, but the limiters, I don't know what the category is called, but apps that help you not be on social media.
Yep.
I need those. I need those more. You can set certain times of day to just be like, no, you're not allowed to look at YouTube or whatever because yeah, they're addicting. It's a problem. And I don't sleep as well as I would like to. So I really like those limiters. Um, and then something I would change, something that I don't like, right?
Yeah.
Ooh. I mean, it's always going to go back to capitalism at the end of the day, I think, you know. Yeah, somebody in Brown Girls was mentioning that they remember the days when social media felt less transactional and it was less about money, um, and more about like being nerds and finding your people. Um, so I miss that. Yeah.
You weren't the first person to mention capitalism. So that is in some ways a very apt answer and an important note to end on, right? That there are the little things, little design features, little policies that maybe we can tweak. But at the end of the day, when you live in a capitalist economy, you're going to have competition and division and I think in some ways loneliness. So I love that call to get back to the original roots of finding your people, which is, how you and your collective started Brown Girls Doc Mafia. And I think how we get out of the mess that we're in today. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. This has been an incredible interview.
Thanks, AJ. It's really great talking to you.